Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight to inaugurate the new Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research. I am so excited to be inaugurating this center. We actually had a ribbon cutting ceremony a few weeks ago at Beebe Hall, where the center is located, and there's so much excitement about where we're heading and about what we're trying to accomplish. And before I sort of get into the remarks, I just want to say about the space we're in. It's so new. We just opened this building a few weeks ago, and you are in the new Human Ecology Commons, and we're so excited to be able to offer this university space for these types of events. And I think it will take many years before I take this for granted, because we really have virtually have never had community space like this. And one other comment, the clouds you see, these artistic sculptures on the ceiling, coming down from the ceiling, were actually a student project. One of the departments in human ecology is design and environmental analysis, and they run an interior design undergraduate program. So the students helped design the structures coming down from the ceiling, and involving students in your facilities, in the way you think about doing buildings, it has been a phenomenal experience for both them and for myself. So again, I just want to say how excited I am about this space. Now, I don't think with this audience, I know many of the faces in this audience, and I don't think I have to work too hard to convince you that of the merits of directly associating Urie Bronfenbrenner's name with a translational research model. While he may not have used the term translational research, it is clear that this methodology and this approach of applying research to impacting people is exactly what Yuri would have been thrilled to see and what he spent a lot of his life trying to accomplish. So it really is an honor to have the opportunity to kick off this event and share a few remarks on how I am, again, personally excited about this and what opportunities I see for human ecology, for Cornell University, and for the public engagement mission more broadly. The Bronfenbrenner Center is an actual merger of two centers that we had before, so this is also an opportunity to recognize the amazing accomplishments of the predecessors of this new center, and that is the Family Life Development Center and what was the Bronfenbrenner Life Course Center. Both of those organizations have achieved tremendous distinction over their years and really form the basis of what we have created. So let me just give a little background on both. For more than 35 years, the Family Life Development Center devoted its mission to child maltreatment and family violence, youth development, children in residential care, HIV/AIDS prevention, and military family life, just to name a few of their main themes. Of currently 10 active programs, I'll just mention two that just stand out to me. One you may have read about recently is the National Data Archive on Child Abuse and Neglect. This was recently awarded a $3.6 million grant from the Department of Health and Human Services, and another program, the longitudinal study of mother-infant dynamics, the Elmira Nurse Family Partnership. Those are fundamental active programs that really define, in some sense, what we mean by outreach. All of these programs will continue as key resources in the new center we've just created. The Bronfenbrenner, yes. The Bronfenbrenner Center, the Life Course Center, fostered early and successful translational research efforts in its existence for the last many years. This, one of the most successful things coming out of the BLCC was the Translational Research Center around aging. So for years, we've had a Roybal Center around, again, the Translational Research Center on Aging, and this has transformed into a program called the Translational Research Institute for Pain in Later Life, and we're all heading there. It is funded by the National Institute of Aging, and again, it's a great example of a program that works not only with this college, but formed very important relationships with the Weill Medical College in New York, and those relationships are now really expanding, and our collaborations with the Medical College in New York are so numerous. We actually were able to devote an entire issue of our Human Ecology magazine just to describing, the 5 or 6, 7 types of major programs we have with the Medical Center, but the National Institute on Aging was really the pioneer and the role model for those. So again, these two centers have been very successful, and what in some sense generated the incentive to sort of bring these expertises together was the basically a difficult question that I asked the two directors, Dan Lichter and John Eckenrode. I said, can you describe to me the difference between family life development and life course, which are the names of the two centers? And we actually had quite a bit of struggle distinguishing those missions. And so he said, well, if we can't really articulate that much difference between these missions, let's think about how we might collaborate. Now, usually when you merge units, it's a pretty tumultuous process. It involves a lot of stress and unhappy people, and I must say, and this is a real credit to John Eckenrode, Dan Lichter, Carl Pillimer, and all the other staff that were involved in the talks of bringing these together. It was one of the most congenial, positive mergers that I've ever witnessed in any institution. So it was actually a pretty painless process because there was so much excitement about joining these energies. So I really want to thank those people in particular. So as we work to map out the impact of joining the units, the complementary aspects of both organizations were clearly unmistakable. The breadth and depth of all the extension and outreach programs, now united in the Bronfenbrenner Center for Translational Research, connect research to communities at critical junctures of the life course, from maternal and child health to the challenges of later life, with the aim to move research to the field more quickly and more effectively than ever. In many sense, the way I think about this center is taking the bench-to-bedside model that is now so pervasive in medical environments, and really applying that much more broadly to the social sciences. And so in many ways, we already in the college are working very closely with the bench-to-bedside translational research center at the Weill Medical College, and what we want to do really is have a comparable center here that does it for the much broader mission of the social sciences, and it's very exciting. So as we reach out to form new research partnerships, we also have the great advantage of being a land-grant university. And what comes with doing translational research within a land-grant university is that we have community trust through Cornell Cooperative Extension. And so the ability to engage in translational research is greatly facilitated by the huge infrastructure and the huge investments we have in people through Cornell Cooperative Extension. So this center will hopefully be a great energy source for bringing the counties together with a research perspective that sometimes is not always there. So sometimes the counties are so focused on their local mission, they're not thinking about the broader research mission. And what this Translational Research Center can do is have community input into the types of research questions we have, and then push it right back into having them part of our research design and our research implementation. So again, having a Translational Research Center with Cornell Cooperative Extension in partnership is a great advantage, and I think will give us a great start for making this program quite successful. In addition, we have the 4-H program, and so the whole issues of understanding youth development and bringing youth development into the research approach and having that impact the way we actually deliver 4-H programs is another very exciting prospect. And we just hired a new director for the 4-H programs that's going to be housed in the Bronfenbrenner Center. And Valerie is sitting right there, Valerie Adams. Welcome to Valerie. And then finally, one of the missions of the whole university in the strategic plan of the Cornell University is to integrate undergraduate education, research, and outreach. And so that's quite a task to be able to do that effectively. And this Translational Research Center is the perfect vehicle to get undergrads interested in both the research side and the extension, outreach, public engagement side. So what I think this center will become will be a centerpiece for undergraduates to actually learn leadership skills, learn not only about research skills, but actually translational research skills, how to take what they learn in the classroom, how do they take the research that the faculty are engaged in, and actually make it matter for people in their everyday life. So this is, again, phenomenally exciting. Now a few comments about Yuri. In his almost 60 years at Cornell, it's hard to believe he was here almost 60 years, Yuri produced a volume of lectures, journal articles, books, and other materials that fill more than 30 boxes now preserved in the university's rare manuscript collection. That huge and tremendously impactful body of work reflects how he transformed not only academic disciplines, but fundamentally changed federal policy towards poverty and child development. What more could you say about translational research than that? By posing a relatively simple question about how academic disciplines could work together in a holistic approach, he not only transformed how academic research and public policy could relate, but he spearheaded research outcomes that led to changes in many, many federal policies. Yuri's example, and that of other pioneers in the field, are unique reminders to me of why at the College of Human Ecology, rather than organized by disciplines, we are actually organized as an approach to learning. All our units are multidisciplinary programs focused on themes that bring researchers and educators together around common interests. These include, and they're so widespread, nutritional genomics, tissue engineering, population policy and demography, human development, law and psychology, design and health, global health. These are just a few of them, but we're not organized by disciplines. We want people to interact around these themes, and it's my hope that this translational research model employed at the new Bronfenbrenner Center will support the field study and evaluation outcomes of social and behavioral science across the entire university, not only the themes of human ecology, but across the entire university. And as a result, we would see successful research move from faculty offices in this building and other buildings to the field, again, as quickly and as effectively as possible. So now let me introduce to you the person that really was the key person to make this happen, John Eckenrode. Like many of us, we wear multiple hats in our jobs. So I have an administrative hat on, I have a faculty hat on, husband hat on, all those things. Although my husband hat and father hat are not getting enough time lately. John is truly masterful at splitting his time, both at the center, the Family Life Development Center before, and now the Bronfenbrenner Center, with his academic appointment as a professor in the Department of Human Development. As director of the FLDC, John has balanced his roles, again, extremely well. He is a committed social and developmental psychologist whose research covers the dimensions of family life that are hard to unravel, but critical to explore in order to build workable solutions for children. He has also, and in an amazing role, he has led. On Monday, we will actually have the ISKL family lecture on public entrepreneurship. And John runs this program as well, so he has to run another major event just this coming Monday. And I've never seen a program that is so well organized that brings undergraduates into the whole foray of, again, extension outreach around social entrepreneurship and gets and attracts some of the greatest speakers that Cornell has come across the campus. This is a phenomenal lecture series. John has really mentored this through. We get tons of support for this because of his leadership, and he's been a pleasure to work with that program as well. And on a personal note, I just have incredible respect for John, his scholarship, his interpersonal skills, his ability to lead a group of people. And again, I've just loved working with him. He makes being a dean, this is what being a dean is about, having people that you can turn to. You could say, deal with this, John. And not only is it done well, but it's done with a smile and with great quality. So John, I hand the podium over to you.
Wow, thank you. I should put my Red Sox hat on, if it's one of the hats I wear that you didn't mention. And my grandfather hat, too, I have to mention that. Well, thank you very much, Alan, for those very kind remarks. Excuse me. But really, most of all, thank you for your support, because it was, over this past year and a half, we really couldn't be at this place. We certainly couldn't be in this physical place, but we couldn't be in this place as an organization without your help and the help of all the deans and everyone in the college who has really given us a lot of support. So thank you for that. We really do look forward to working closely with you, with all the college leadership, and fulfilling the mission of this new center. And just thank you again for making this great space available to us tonight. I'm sure it'll get a lot of use over the years. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see everybody, such good friends and colleagues, people we haven't seen in a while. I hope you're connecting with old friends and colleagues that you haven't connected with a while, and it's just a great group. Thank you for coming out on a weeknight and to celebrate this kickoff to our new center. I want to give a couple of special welcomes to we have some out-of-town guests who are here for the Bronfenbrenner Conference, which will be held, the third Bronfenbrenner Conference will be held over the next couple of days. Valerie Reyna is here, Vivian, I don't know if Vivian is here, who, Vivian Zaza, yes, who have organized this conference on neuroscience and risky decision-making. So I welcome the out-of-town speakers and discussants who came from far and wide to be here. I also want to give a special recognition to Yuri's wife, Lisa, who is joining us here tonight, and his daughter, Kate. It's always a special treat to have the Bronfenbrenner family with us, and I look forward to many more opportunities to interact with you as well. Now, there's a lot of people to thank who've contributed to the planning of this new center and making it a reality. Our planning committee that met for over a year was just terrific, and I do want to name those folks because they really were responsible for putting, really the meat on the bones of this idea. Dan Lichter was part of that group, Elaine Wethington, Rachel Donovan, Chris Olson, Carl Pillemer, Rhoda Metter, Jane Powers, Jen Tiffany, Steve Hamilton, and Bill Trocham met for about a year and a half very regularly, and I want to thank them so much for all their creative ideas, and better yet, for actually putting some of those down on paper. So I didn't have to write all the words. They really did help out in putting this down on paper. So thank you, committee. I also want to thank Carrie Chalmers and Diana Brinkman for organizing tonight's lovely affair. They really put many hours into this. I really want to thank them for this, so thank you. And as always, a big thanks to my expert assistant, Patty Thayer, for keeping me on track. So thank you. But I really think the special thanks I want to give is to all the staff who are affiliated with the two centers that we're bringing together, the BLCC and the FLDC. It's really through your talents and your dedication, your creativity as reflected in the multiple programs, the successful programs that we have in the two centers, that will really form the foundation of all our work for the years to come. So I really thank you for all your work. It's really a pleasure working with everybody. Alan said it's a pleasure working with faculty like me, but I have a great job working with just such a tremendous group of people. So thank you for making my job easy. Now, excuse me. Now, many of the people that have formed the foundation of the center are here tonight in the room, but we, excuse me, have others that are not here, but are certainly in our thoughts at such a transformative moment. And I want to take a moment to recognize a few of those names to this and the significant contributions that former staff and directors made to both centers. So I want to, for the FLDC, we certainly owe a special recognition to John Doris, who really built and led this Family Life Development Center for many years and made it what it was, and to Jim Garbarino, who was took over from John as director of the center for his very significant contributions. So thank you very much, Jim, for your work in building the Family Life Development Center. For the BLCC, we likely acknowledge the contributions of Phyllis Mohn, who couldn't be with us here tonight, who was the founding director of the BLCC, and to Dan Lichter, who is here tonight, who was the most recent director of the BLCC and now is moving over to head the Cornell Population Program. So we wish Dan lots of luck in this very dynamic time for that organization as well. So we certainly have a firm foundation to build on. This new center, but this new center will not simply be a renaming and kind of repackaging of what came before. If we wanted to do that, I don't think we would have picked a name that has challenged us in two really fundamental ways. First, we're really both proud and humbled to continue to associate the name of Urie Bronfenbrenner with our center, of course. But Yuri's legacy in the field of developmental psychology and beyond sets a very high bar for us. In keeping his name attached to the center, we are really challenged to adapt his ideas and insights to current realities within and beyond the walls of the university. And this is certainly no easy task for those of you who know Yuri's work. Second, we adopted the term translational research, not one that is familiar to everyone or around which there isn't even consensus about what that means. I have an interesting illustration of that. Just happened a couple of days ago. An undergraduate came to my office to interview me for a story that was going to appear in the Cornell Daily Sun, which is the daily Cornell newspaper. And I saw the copy of the story a couple of days later, and the first line of the story talked about this new center for transitional research that was opening. So, interesting, actually, name. And that's how new fields are born, I guess. Somebody kind of slips up, and now we have the field of transitional research, and we'll come to you for that new center, Alan, next week for the transition. So we've taken on this additional challenge to take a concept that, while growing in usage in scientific and governmental circles, is being operationalized and apparently spelled in many different ways. It's really our programs and activities that will define our particular usage of that term. Other people's puzzlement as to what we mean by translational research will really force us to be clear and to come up with several really good examples of our work that exemplify that concept, much as the faculty administrators in this college over the years have had to do with the concept of human ecology, by the way. But it's doable, and it's really through the faculty and the staff and the students that are part of those organizations that really help define what those concepts mean. So this is an experiment. We have a good intervention in mind, I think. Perhaps we even have a logic model to guide our intervention. But we can't be really certain at this point all the outcomes just yet. One of my favorite Yuri quotes is, "Experiments created as real are real in their consequences." Now, at the time, Yuri may have been commenting on the artificiality of much experimental child psychology and the need to study children and families in the context in which they actually live. In the case of this new center, I will interpret this to mean that what we need to do is do work that is grounded in the realities of the mission of the college, is rigorous by scientific standards, in which has to deal with real-life issues facing families and children in our society. If we do all that, our experiments will have real consequences. So like the college that houses our center, we seek not to fit into the old molds and ways of thinking, but rather to break new ground and stimulate work that cuts across the disciplines, is problem-focused, and builds bridges within the university and the world it serves. I look forward to working with all of you, making this center a vibrant institution that helps advance the broader mission of the college. And I want to thank you so much for helping getting us really to this point. So, thank you. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed their dinner. It seemed like everybody was having a great time reconnecting with old friends. Now for our after-dinner entertainment. I'm really pleased that we have with us this evening, to finish up the program, a panel of former Yuri students who so graciously, in each of their cases, came some distance to be with us here tonight. And so I really appreciate their efforts to do that. Each of them is a very highly accomplished professional in their own right, in their own fields. And I'm not going to take a lot of time, and I'll do an injustice to them in terms of not giving them their full due in terms of the biographies. But we did print their biographies on the back of your program, so I hope everyone will take a look at that and really appreciate the accomplishments of each of our panelists tonight. But I wanted to thank Nan Crouter and Jim Garbarino and David Olds for making the effort to come back to Cornell and helping make this a really special event. I'll say just a couple words about each of them just to give their names and titles, and then I'll ask them to come up and join me on the stage. Or actually, why don't you come up whenever you're ready, and then I can... I'll start with Jim. Jim Garbarino, on my far right, he holds the Maud C. Clark Chair in Humanistic Psychology and was founding director of the Center for Human Rights of Children at Loyola University, Chicago. But previously, he was the Elizabeth Lee Vincent Professor of Human Development and co-director of the Family Life Development Center at Cornell, and so Jim and I have worked very closely together over the years. He earned his BA from St. Lawrence University and his PhD from Human Development and Family Studies, of course, in 1973. And Jim's, he's done a lot of work that I just can't take the time to talk about, but he's received many awards for his work in the fields of child maltreatment, children in war, children's rights, and other related areas. Next to Jim is Nan Crouter. Nan is the Raymond E. and Aaron Stuart Schultz Dean of the College of Health and Human Development at Penn State, which is kind of our sister college down the road at Penn State. She completed her undergraduate work in psychology and English at Stanford, and of course got her PhD in Human Development and Family Studies in 1982 before joining the faculty at A of HDFS at Penn State. And there she really has developed an illustrious career around research and teaching around parents' work circumstances, family dynamics, and their implications for children and adolescents. And last but not least, to my right is David Olds. David is professor of pediatrics, psychiatry and public health, and nursing. That's a lot of departments, David. At the University of Colorado, Denver, where he directs the Prevention Research Center for Family and Child Health. He obtained his BA from Johns Hopkins and his PhD from Cornell. And he's really devoted his career to investigating methods of preventing health and developmental problems in children and parents from low-income families. And he's probably best known for the work he's done throughout his career in developing, testing, and now promoting the Nurse Family Partnership Program, which serves socially disadvantaged mothers bearing their first children. So that's our esteemed, very esteemed panel. What I'd like to say is how this will go. And what I asked our panelists to do is, rather than each of them give speeches, to really just be prepared to have a conversation between them and us as an audience. And I asked them to kind of focus on a few different themes. One would be, of course, any reflections they had about their time at Cornell, what it was like to be a student of Yuri's, and so forth. So some nice reminiscences about that, but also what those experiences and what they learned here has meant for them. I mean, they've all gone on to have very impressive careers, and what their time here at Cornell meant in terms of their own professional development, and of course any thoughts they had or reflections about the themes of our new center. So that's their charge, and I think, and I'll ask them to kind of just go back and forth and share stories and get into a conversation. So I hope I won't have to moderate at all, other than to, you know, except Jim, I think I'll have to moderate a little bit, but anyway. But I'm gonna actually turn to Jim first and put him on the spot and ask him to kind of get us rolling, and just, if he could just get us started and talk a little bit about how he first came upon Yuri or get connected with Yuri. So.
I'm going to stand because later there's a visual bit that will require standing, but if you were watching closely in the video, you will realize I only own one tie and shirt. That's about it. I will stand again later. I met Yuri first in 1966 when I was 19 years old. I was a counselor at a Unitarian summer camp in the Adirondacks, and Yuri came with 3 members of his family to the family camp. And during the day, there were programs for kids that I sort of ran a lot of that. And in the evenings, he would talk to parents. He was talking to parents about the material that became 2 Worlds of Childhood, and obviously was involved in trying to make this translation from the field of child development research to a group of parents, of trying it out on them. But because my responsibilities with the kids was over by the time he started talking, I was able to sit in on those talks. And as a result, I wrote a play about adolescent alienation, a play that was called A Tree Grows. And it was a reflection, since we were told to use the word translation as often as possible, a translation of Yuri's talk into a dramatic theme. And the star of that play was a 12-year-old girl who actually is here tonight. It was Kate Bronfenbrenner. It's the star of that play. And that was the first sort of intellectual exchange Yuri and I had, really, was over those issues. And of course, it grew from that in many ways, which I'll return to in a moment. But the other thing was that Yuri was exposed to volleyball at that camp. And not just volleyball, but because it was a family camp and I was the volleyball counselor, I organized these intergenerational volleyball games with young children and the parents and the staff. And of course, Yuri was so taken with that, as many of you know, he came back and created a volleyball court in their side yard. And it became a neighborhood and tradition. And when I did finally, a few years later, come to be a graduate student, I was part of that. And Kate asked me to remind you that she was an excellent volleyball player in that day. Not only a dramatic star, but a volleyball star, just wildly talented in that domain as well. So, but you see, I was not in psychology. I was in history and government, and actually started at Cornell in the government department. But it didn't go very well. And after my first year, I shifted over to teach at what was then DeWitt Junior High School, and was sort of floundering a bit. And a former professor of mine said, well, why don't you come to the University of Wisconsin and study American history? Which sounded quite appealing, and so I submitted an application. And while that transfer was pending, I happened to go see Yuri, who I'd seen quite often over the years. And Yuri said, why don't you give human development a try? And I said, well, it's simpler than going to Wisconsin. And so I made that transition. So Yuri became a mentor with a double capital M in many, many ways. Some of you know the psychoanalytic term of introjection. Well, I really introjected Urie Bronfenbrenner as best I could in those years. And he was an extraordinary presence in many, many ways. John asked us to include as many humorous anecdotes as we could. And that, as you know, if you knew Yuri, that would not be hard to do. Each decade produced a new series of humorous anecdotes, many of which have the theme of Yuri as being this almost childlike figure blundering into social influence. For example, one year when Sesame Street was new, Psychology Today asked him to write a review. And so every day after class, he would go home and watch Sesame Street. And he wrote this brilliant review that highlighted that they were not dealing with human values very well, and they changed it. This is somebody who didn't watch much TV, but he changed TV. This happened over and over again. Some of you know the McDonald's story, where a former student had the McDonald's advertising account, and they came and showed him the Hamburglar campaign, and he said, no, that's all wrong. You're a family-oriented restaurant. And they said, no, we're a fast food restaurant. No, you're a family-oriented restaurant. You need to show families and parents and children. And a year later, they came out with that campaign. Of course, what Yuri didn't tell them is he had never been in a McDonald's, I think, and would never be seen dead in a McDonald's. But he had the sense to make that connection. Once at this summer camp, people were always asking Yuri to take a look at things. They had a new sex ed campaign the Unitarian Church was going to offer. It was a slideshow, it's low tech. And it showed dogs doing it, and chickens doing it, and fish doing it. And then when it got to people, it was this couple lying side by side with a blanket up to their necks. And I remember Yuri had this group of children, was asking them what they thought, and they thought this was perfectly reasonable. Well, later that afternoon, two of the counselors were lying fully clothed on the couch. And one of the children that Yuri had taught sex ed to that morning came up and said to the counselor, no, you got it all wrong. She's supposed to be lying like this, and he's lying like... He always had a perspective. The visual bit is this, that at one point, some of the other students and I had a pool going, which was, when Yuri started to lecture, we knew that he would take off his suit coat. The question was, how soon would this shirt tail hang out? You know, was it going to be 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes? And we would, bet small amounts on this, and someone always won. So I thought I would make sure I included that. Can I do two more quick ones? One quick one. When they introduced new vending machines in the Martha Van cafeteria, Yuri came down the first day, and I don't know if you've seen the movie The Gods Must Be Angry, where a Coke bottle drops from the sky into the Kalahari Desert. That's what you would have thought was happening. Yuri looked at these machines as if he was an Aboriginal person discovering the 20th century for the first time. The serious story is, though, once I was sitting with him, and he had just gotten off the phone with Walter Mondale. And as many of you know, Yuri was very involved in the political scene. And he had just spoken to Walter Mondale, and earlier in the day it was this and it was that. And he said to me, isn't it amazing that we get to do this? We get to do this, and they pay us for it. And then he looked at me and said, but don't you ever forget, it's a big responsibility. Next.
How do you want to do this? I got to know Yuri actually through Jim, because I worked for Jim for a year following college in Omaha, Nebraska. And I had a great job with Jim, but I really hated Omaha, Nebraska, and was pretty rapidly beginning to think about graduate programs when Yuri came to give a talk. And I found myself thinking that Cornell would be great. So I ended up the following fall driving alone from Wyoming, which is where my family is, which is significant for the one thing that I have to read, to Ithaca, and kind of driving down through Trumansburg. And I hadn't visited. I think in those days it was rare to visit graduate programs. But I just talked to Jim, I talked to Yuri, and I just trusted that this move would work out. And it did. It was a wonderful fit for me. And Yuri was a demanding but incredibly kind and generous mentor. In the beginning, I don't know about you guys, but I had really short appointments. you got like 20 minutes, and you had to rush in there with your list and be incredibly disciplined about getting everything out of him that you needed to get out of him in this really short period of time so that you could go back and get tons done before the next time. And I managed it and have found it incredibly useful. I actually ended up later, I think, as a mentor, giving students more time and kind of resenting that they didn't get as much out of it as I seemed to get out of that precious, 15 or 20 minutes. The image, I mean, I appreciated John's invitation so much because I've been thinking about Yuri so much, knowing that I was coming here. And I actually drove up here in September of '81 to defend my dissertation after I'd started my job at Penn State. So it was exactly 30 years ago. I came up here for the defense, and I was telling Kate and Lisa about it. What happened then was I had a wonderful dissertation committee that included William Foote White from the School of Labor Relations. And there was an employee strike going on at Penn State. And Bill White called Yuri to say, at Cornell. I've been at Penn State for 30 years, so it's hard to switch institutions. Bill White called Yuri and said that there was this strike going on and that he couldn't come on campus for my thesis defense. And for a while it looked as though it wasn't going to happen. But in the end, if you can imagine a gorgeous Ithaca September day, we had it in the Bronfenbrenner's yard. And we all sat in lawn chairs, kind of leaning back. And it was the power of context, really, because it was hard to be stressed out. It was a totally gorgeous day. And I have really the kind of fondest memories of several hours that I had thought previously were going to be so grim. About a year before, I had gotten married, and my family's in Wyoming, so the wedding was in Wyoming. And the Bronfenbrenners couldn't come, but they sent us a telegram. And so the only thing I want to read, because I didn't know we'd have this wonderful video and we'd actually get to hear Yuri's voice, but I did want to read you a telegram that he and Lisa sent us. My husband, we looked everywhere for this, and finally this afternoon he called, said, I found it, and read it to me over the phone. But this is vintage Yuri. Our sensitive research instruments have just detected a dramatic improvement in human ecology, radiating from remote region in Wyoming. Supports have risen, stresses dropped, social networks proliferated, and family activities abound. The trend emanates from a new trans-contextual dyad with an extremely long life trajectory. Make it macro. Yuri and Lisa. So my blessing for you through Yuri is I hope this center makes it macro.
You know, my first exposure to Yuri came after I had started working in an inner city daycare center on West Lombard Street in Baltimore in 1970. I had worked with Mary Ainsworth. Some of you may know about Mary Ainsworth. She operationalized, from a research perspective, a lot of the John Bowlby's work in attachment theory. And I went to work in this inner city daycare center thinking that I was going to transform the world. I was a product of the 60s. And suddenly, the reality of inner city life just smacked me in the face. And I had, while teaching in this with 4-year-olds, I read Two Worlds of Childhood. And so I liked some of it, and I was puzzled by other parts of it. So while the kids were napping, I pulled out a yellow pad and wrote a letter to this fellow, Urie Bronfenbrenner. And within a week or two later, I got a response from him. And so I hadn't thought about, I guess I realized that I needed to learn more and I needed to do more in order to really affect the lives of vulnerable children. And so Yuri said, I'm going to be in DC in a week or two. If you want to come down and listen to me lecture, we can do that. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk. So I did that. And and he essentially said, why don't you come to graduate school at Cornell? And so I did. And I guess for me, at that point, I think for many of us, at that point in our country's history, it was a moment where there was a certain impatience. I had a certain impatience about my own life. I wanted to make a difference. And I wasn't quite sure. When I went to work in that inner city daycare center, I wasn't sure that I ever wanted to do any academic work again in my life. But through my interactions with Yuri, I suddenly realized that one could focus on problems and that academia and research and scholarship could be used in the service of solving social problems. And for me, that was a huge transformational insight. And so this kind of work suddenly had meaning to me. And it was through Yuri's example of, first of all, his energy, his commitment to really making a difference. Because for him, it was not just developing a theory of human ecology. I mean, that was a framework, but really, I think his heart was all about making a difference, helping human beings be human. And so for me, that the sense that one could have a career focused on that mission was very deep and left a lasting impression upon me. And it gave me a sense of hope. But I have to tell you that in the middle of my academic, my PhD career, I went to Yuri and I said, I'm not sure that I'm really cut out for this academic stuff. I said, what he said to me was just finish up this dissertation and get out of here, because he said, once you're out, you'll start learning and being able to do learning from that experience and be able to do what really matters. He said, but finish this degree, which I did. I think that for me, there was one thing that he quoted, and I think it was his own father. He said that good science is disciplined passion. And that seems to me to be sort of the heart of all of this kind of work. What's it kind of characterized Yuri, and I've carried it inside of me in this sense. And that is, first of all, one needs a passion, a sense of what's important in life, and that science and scholarship can be the kind of discipline that helps you check and channel that passion. And so for me, that was another great gift, because I've carried that around in the way I think about life and my personal career a lot. So, thank you.
Well, those are terrific thoughts, and I'm just going to kind of open it up and let you guys talk as much or as little as you want. But I'll come back to Jim and see if you want to carry it forward, or do you want? I mean, we can have people from the audience.
People have
also.
questions about him, or what he was like.
And my guess is that there are a lot of people out there, and I'm looking at Mon and Chuck and others, and a lot of people in this who are here knew Yuri and were. I'm sure affected by his life as well. So, I mean, John, I'd love to just hear other people's reflections on it.
Sure, whatever. We can be as open as we want. Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Generous, and all of us, kind of contact with the house. talk with extension educators, Carol used to be involved with them, and actually even, quite late in his career, we had him come in and do question and answers with them, so he was always very committed. He's the official extension and outreach mission of the university and really liked a lot of that kind of work. And I've always remembered that as a particular gift of his, that he was so supportive of the outreach and extension side, even when sometimes others weren't.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think that,
you guys.
Well, I was just responding to David's example about having those second thoughts about whether you were really cut out for academics. I think as kind of demanding as he was in many ways, I think what struck me was what fundamentally he was very giving. And I too I got the job at Penn State before there was that awful scenario. The dissertation was not finished. I had this job. Everyone had all of these high hopes, and I had to get this dissertation to cooperate. And I just had, weeks of kind of struggling with this thing. And at one point, I said, I just don't feel ready. I shouldn't have applied this year. I should have waited a year. This thing isn't cooperating. And he said, very sincerely, with those kind of eyes just kind of right on me, he said, you have no idea how often I have self-doubts, how often I send off a manuscript and think, will anybody really think it's any good? This is normal. You just have to, you have to press on and trust my judgment in you and your judgment in yourself. And it was a very helpful message, timed in this very compassionate but very firm way that I have literally tried to emulate when working with my own students, because invariably students have those moments, and I've thought back to that conversation many times. So he must have been good at it.
yeah, exactly.
Jim, how about you?
Well, maybe it's the kind of people who were drawn to Yuri and vice versa, but I also had this sort of crisis of faith about finishing, and received much the same message, which was get the damn thing done and then go about your work.
Then have your mental health crisis.
But I thought one thing that was in that little video that I wanted to respond to was his sense of the interplay between policy and research. Back in the early 1970s, Yuri was asked to do a presentation in Germany, and he asked me to go instead. And he was very generous about sharing authorship and all of that. That was one of his gifts to us, which I think we've passed on to our students. But we wrote a paper called Research, it was originally in German, but in English it's Research in Public Policy, Who Needs Whom? And the thesis of it was the sort of conventional idea is that public policy needs research to do better, to raise the quality of public debate and so on. But the bulk of this article was something that really flowed from this ecological perspective. If the perspective of human ecology is development is context specific, the array of possible contexts to study is in principle enormous, almost infinite. And what Yuri suggested and we wrote in that paper was that one of the relationships between public policy and research is that researchers look to public policy for the questions that need to be asked. That it isn't a matter of any question, researchers could generate any question that they wanted, but to engage public policy as the source of questions was something that was a bit different. And when I was president of the Erickson Institute in Chicago, I actually tried to get the faculty to have a sense of that their agenda, their research and academic agenda, was not simply driven by their own personal interests, but it was finding questions that needed to be answered in the field of early childhood education, early child development, and if they could latch their passion onto that, it would really fulfill this mission much more clearly. Because he was very much about improving the quality of public debate, but as a reciprocal process. not as a unitary flow from the academic community to the regular folks, but the regular folks forming some of the questions and issues that needed to be answered. And I think that's often overlooked, and I hope the center will have that sense of a two-way flow of influence, because it really was at the heart of some of his thinking about that.
I think, I guess my quick, also I want to mention something about just the center. I think that this is a brilliant kind of synthesis of Yuri's name and legacy, and bringing that together with the current emphasis on making research matter. And the point that was made in the video, I just want to reinforce, and that is that it's not just, I think maybe Steve has said this, it's not just about thinking about how you apply research findings to problems in the public arena, but it's also, there's an opportunity to study the very implementation and policymaking process itself. And that gives, I think, all of us some hope that our work is going to have even broader, deeper impact. So I think it's wonderful that you've chosen to name this center after Yuri.
John Harding, yes.
On a different note, I want to say a few words about Yuri as a teacher of undergraduates. Some of you may know that he was originally brought to Cornell because of his great success out at the University of Michigan with an undergraduate teacher. And I occasionally listen to his lectures in Bailey Hall, where for many years he taught in his huge undergraduate course, maybe about 200 students. And what was most unusual about it was that he not only lectured, but he invited students to come up to and engage in dialogue, ask questions to which he would try to respond, and it was the most magnificent example of interactive teaching with a huge undergraduate audience.
That's great. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John. I think we all agree that was really spectacular.
Steve.
This reminds me of a Yuri story with two parts. Rex and I co-edited a volume called the Youth Development Handbook. We asked our authors to write about various aspects of youth development. Didn't say a thing about the ecology of human development, Urie Bronfenbrenner. And when the chapters came in, nearly every one cited Bronfenbrenner. As a result of that, we dedicated the book to Yuri, and when it came out, we invited some people over. Yuri and Lisa came. Janet Reno happened to be on campus lecturing, and she said, throughout my career, people have asked me why I, as a lawyer, have such dedication and knowledge about children and families. And I told them it's because I took Urie Bronfenbrenner's introductory course in human development.
You know, he was a great teacher in person, but also, if you study the quality of his writing, he's somebody who could make his ideas really interesting to people. And I think that's an aspect of translation, of getting the ideas out there in an interesting form. I decided during my first sabbatical, Yuri and I agreed that I would come back to Cornell and that we would talk about what we had done since, and that I would send a packet of my work to him and he would send a packet of his work to me. Perfect sabbatical project. And although 6 or 7 years seemed like a long time, I got back into his office in that chair, and I thought, oh, here we go again. And the first thing he said was very complimentary. He was not disappointed in me, but he immediately started carving up my writing. and how certain sentences were put together, and how I led with a certain idea, and it would have been better to do this. And it was just like being a student, so constructive and helpful, but critical.
Now, one of your things was to say that too much of time was spent focusing on what we don't know, and because we really wanted to project into the world, we had to focus on what we do know, and that was an important message. But sometimes it got to it took a form that was a little bit bizarre. When I was, I think, a second-year student, a first-year student, Maureen Mahoney, some of you know, she was Yuri's assistant, came to me in this tizzy. He had sent her to find this study, and she had been looking for it, for days and weeks, and was so afraid to disappoint him to go back when she couldn't find the study. So I said, well, tell me about it, maybe I know the study. So she began to describe the study, and a smile came across my face, and I explained to her that about 8 months earlier, in a talk, Yuri had said, somebody should do a study on this topic. And then 4 months later, Yuri said, I bet if they did this study, this is how it would turn out. And now he sent the graduate student to find that study. Having come to believe that it must have come.
Must have happened.
She was very relieved.
Well, maybe a couple more comments. Joan?
I came to the Department of Human Development in 1979, and I was the odd person out being a historian. Yuri was very fond of the discipline of history. He loved reading history books. He had studied with Carl Becker here at Cornell. He used to describe in a very humorous way the way in which Carl Becker had found or uncovered that he had been writing papers for at least 3 other people in the Arts College, and how Becker dealt with him in a very humane way around his active writing career. And at some point, I don't remember where it was, when it was, Phyllis Bowen moved to another office, and I got Phyllis's office on the bridge, and I was across from Yuri. And so Yuri would very often even knock on my door and say, what are you doing? He was interested in primary source material and what historians did. And I told him that I was really interested in the history of anorexia nervosa. And it started a conversation that, in all honesty, led to my writing Fasting Girls. And it was with Yuri that I sat around talking about Catherine of Siena. Here were these 2 secular Jews trying to figure out why it is that women abuse the appetite the way they have historically in so many different contexts. And I certainly learned a lot about his essential thinking and was able to utilize it in a history book.
That's great. I don't want to cut off too many more comments, but did our panel have any other comments? Because you've traveled a long way to get here. We can talk among ourselves, but anything else to add?
I suppose you should mention this. The human ecology theory played a central role in the design of the intervention that we've developed and tested over the years. And so, for me, it was learning how to organize and think deeply about how the social environment and material environment affect families' capacity to take care of their children, and how the right person at the right time in family development might be able to marshal resources to affect some critical aspects of those contexts was really very, very important to our work. And so I have little doubt that in fact, I know from my personal experience in Baltimore that without being able to think deeply about context, what we've done really wouldn't have been possible. So,
Yuri was fond of quoting Harry Stack Sullivan, psychiatrist who studies schizophrenics, and what the quote that he conveyed was Sullivan saying, "People are more simply human than otherwise." And I I've taken that was really, as Joan's saying, you know, thinking about that led to my best work, which is a book called Lost Boys, which is based on interviewing violent incarcerated kids and is extended to working in death penalty cases, where the whole focus of the work is to take a grotesque, inhuman act committed by somebody that people think of as a monster and try to tell their developmental story in a way that makes it a human story and thus sort of brings them back into the fold. And that's certainly something I attribute to Yuri and I'm very grateful for. We all agreed we weren't going to cry by the end of this, but I know we're getting close. Want to have the last word?
Do I want the last word? Well, if we're all talking about our own work, I'll simply say that I did my dissertation here in a diesel engine company. And Yuri, it wasn't Yuri's cup of tea, but he was so supportive. He made sure I got connected to the right people in the School of Labor Relations, and they found just the right place where I could look at what I was interested in. And I've been interested in work and work environments and their impact on people and how they spill over into family life ever since. And so he had a generosity of letting people find what made them excited and encouraging it and pushing it. And I think for all of us, those themes have resounded for decades. So I was only here for a short time when you look at a whole life, and really only interacted with him extensively for that short time, but he had a huge effect on us, and then through us, don't forget, on our students. So I've had many doctoral students now who are getting my version of Yuri, and so he has ripple effects through all of us.
That's terrific. Well, thank you so much for coming. It's been terrific.